So if the length of that blue bar is the current level of economic activity, so let's say this is $14 trillion, right? So there's real GDP. So real GDP equals $14 trillion. How did we get it? What did we do? Could it have been better? May it have been worse? Kind of is at the heart of the argument. So Hayek proposes that the best approach would be kind of a ground-up approach. And Keynes and others would say we need to have a more top-down approach to getting GDP to what it needs to be. So we've got what it is today, and we do not live in a free market economy. It's one of the freer markets, but there is an economic freedom index that's published every year. One of them is done by a former graduate of Ottawa University, Jim Gortney, does the Economic Freedom Index of the world. And he took the data and compiled things that he thinks are more prevalent in a free society. So more of just property rights. So in China, those people don't have the same level of property rights as Americans do, right? The government controls a large part of it through the communist way of running the country. And so the level of property rights is an important issue. The ability to trade, how open your borders are. We in the international trade chapter talked about the advantages we can have by trading with each other. So a number of different things. And the United States, let's see, on one of those indices I think was ranked 14th. And that's quite a ways down. We used to be, when he was, even if you go back 10 years, we were closer in the top 5. So we've been dropping down the rankings. And there's a couple other institutions that put these together as well, and it's the same sort of result. So in the two schools of thought, if we allowed, so the Hayek camp would be down here, and the Keynes camp would be up here. Had the markets been more free and people able to do their own thing and look out for themselves, would the potential be wider? All right, so would we end up getting more output at the end of the day from leaving things from this ground-up approach? There is oodles, and you guys have studied some in this class, and those of you who had micro, but there's lots of good micro models, let's put that in quotes, but micro models. And really, we did that with the very first thing we did with Tom and Jen on the island, and how they used trade to make them both better off, and how that shows increasing the output for the country. So that's where Hayek gets his approach, is that if we let individuals pursue their own self-interest, we're going to maximize society's interest. And that really goes all the way back to Adam Smith in 1776 in The Wealth of Nations. So that's where Hayek's coming from, is that people will do what's best for themselves, and in doing so, do what's best for the country. So Keynes' argument to that is we went through the Great Recession, or the Great Depression in the 30s, and that's what kind of motivated him to say, geez, the government could be a large player, and is a large player even at that time, or starting to be. Maybe they can manage the economy through monetary policy, as we've learned, changing interest rates through the increase or decrease in the money supply. So Ben Bernanke was in that video, or an actor playing him anyway. That was really good. If you don't know what Ben Bernanke looks like, you won't be able to appreciate that as well, but it looked pretty good. So who are these top-down players? Obama, Congress, the Federal Reserve. You know, can we manage things better so that we don't have these maybe fluctuations? The argument to that's been pretty well documented by different economists, that it is possible for the government to do more harm than good. So the government's made mistakes on changes in the money supply and how the Federal Reserve reacted in the Great Depression, how the Federal Reserve and the current institutions that are in place, like our banking institutions. I'm reading a book right now by a guy named John Allison that's really outstanding. He was the CEO of BB&T, which was a large bank like Chase and Wells Fargo and the big banks. We don't have it here in Kansas, but he's located more, I think, in the southeast area. And he's kind of come out and in this book and spoke about how kind of messed up, in his opinion, the economy is in terms of these safety nets that we have in place and the bailouts. So you guys have heard of GM getting bailed out and banks getting bailed out and some of the larger financial institutions on Wall Street getting bailed out. One of the key things that makes this system work are failures. Failures are just as important as big profits. So when people fail, they behave differently to avoid failure. If you know that the government's just going to bail you out, and maybe you can think about your situation with your parents or some connections that you have, if somebody's going to bail you out, you behave differently, right? The incentives are different. And so that's what he points to in this book, even going back to like FDIC insurance. That was put in place in terms of the general public getting that kind of safety net that, hey, if the bank goes under, you'll still get your money back, which serves an important function. However, at the same time, it causes banks to be able to enter the market, into the banking market, a little easier. And I really didn't think all the way through what he put in this book, but it's spot on. So a new bank opens up, right? So Quickie Buck Bank opens up a new place in Ottawa, Kansas. They start offering certificate of deposit rates that are higher than the established banks that are here because they want your deposits, right? So maybe new people coming in, they're like, oh, well, that bank pays out higher than this bank. I should go with that bank. And of course, you're doing that completely in a rational way because the FDIC insures your deposit. So even if you put 50 grand in that deposit, it doesn't matter which one you put it in, your 50,000 is guaranteed by the United States government, or more likely the taxpayers of the United States government. So you've got that guarantee. So then new bank comes into the market again, opens up, and says, so bank A versus, I guess I'll just use BB&T since I learned this from here. So this is the well-established bank. They're offering a low 1% because interest rates are so low. Bank A comes in and says 2%. So people rightfully flock to this bank. So now we've got $100 million in deposits at this bank. We learned in Chapter 8 that that bank's going to go out and make loans to other people, right? Now they're required to hold back a fraction of that. So maybe they go out and that turns into $90 million of loans. On the lending side, the established banks have kind of a leg up on things in terms of banking relationships and other things. So when this guy turns down a loan that seems a little too risky, that person, that real estate developer or that business owner with a risky venture just goes over to the new bank and says, hey, I got this. Well, I know I got turned down by this bank, but you know, we just got all these funds in. I think we'll take you on. And so what happens is this bank starts taking on more risky investments, riskier than what other banks may have done. All of this the foundation was set up from that FDIC insurance that started off in the first place. So now we've got risky loans going out from this guy. So he makes riskier loans than what the solid banks may have done. And risky loans tend to, when the whole economy starts to go in the toilet, these guys are probably the first to go. They're the first ones who can't start, paying their bills. And so then they start to lose money on these loans, and we're faced with the situation, do we bail it out or not, and go from there. But that's kind of how incentives in the marketplace can get distorted when we have a top-down approach by trying to satisfy one area causes a hole in another area. And it becomes difficult to try to manage things from this place because Hayek would maintain that there's no government, no body of government that could, there's not even any economist around that can really capture all of the outcomes that are expected to happen from one policy change. It's just that complex. It's crazy complex. And so the information that you'd need to do something like that then causes mistakes to happen. And so when those mistakes happen, it can cause people to make bad decisions. And this would be an example of a bad decision being made on our island, right? Where sometimes stepping back, that bank might have been making a profitable decision or willing to take on the risk. But when we left the rest of the taxpayers in potential harm's way, was that the right way to do it? Was it the best thing to do in terms of how we organize the institutions of private sector business, households, and government on our island? All right, let me pause there for a sec. Questions or comments? All right, so I thought that would be a good warmer-upper for Chapter 13 material is what we're going to spend the rest of our time on. Before we do that, I've got a couple things that, it kind of goes over between 13 and 12, but it's mostly towards the tail end of 12, on some models of the economy, or theories on what causes business cycles. We've already gone over a couple of them. We started with Keynes. So the question of what causes business cycles. So the Keynesian theory, I'll just make a few comments just to motivate things here. With Keynes, we had the animal spirits. What was Keynes talking about with animal spirits? I think we mentioned that in one of the video lectures. Animal spirits of business is what it was really kind of looking for. What would that describe? That business and investment is driven by animal spirits. It happened. Why does he use the word animal spirits? Okay. But in an animal way, not a tame way. So why did he use the word animal? And spirits is kind of like driven by animal spirits. It sounds very Native American, doesn't it? Unpredictable, kind of wild, speculative. So, I mean, Keynes would look at this and say, well, that's what these crazy guys are doing. They're not, maybe some of them aren't even smart enough to analyze on their own how great a risk that they're taking. So that would be one argument about, from Hayek's approach, is like, well, can we really trust these crazy guys down here, you know? We can probably figure out things better, or is it okay? So Hayek refers to, and it was mentioned in the video early on, you probably didn't catch it. That's why there's a lot of neat things in that video that go back to the kind of professional literature on this. He refers to something called the fatal conceit. The fatal conceit. And what he was talking about on the fatal conceit is that there's some of us on our island that think we're a lot smarter than the people down here. And in some ways, they probably are smarter, right? I mean, you know, Ben Bernanke's a pretty darn smart guy. And Obama is a pretty smart guy. And I know some of you would be anti-Obama, but all those guys have some smarts usually when they make it all the way up to the presidency. Now, congressmen, on the other hand, no. So maybe we go back and forth on that a bit, but the idea here is that we need to help those people who are more intellectually challenged down here. Whereas Hayek would argue a couple things probably. One is they know what's best for themselves. The people down here can figure out what's best for themselves. Even if they can't solve a first derivative on some mathematical equation, they know how to do what's best for themselves, to take action according to the incentives that are in place to do what's best for themselves. So that's what Hayek would argue. The second thing Hayek would argue is that for everybody who's making a bonehead decision down here, there's somebody offsetting that person making a good decision. And one of the important aspects of the economy is for people to make mistakes and then correct the mistakes. I mean, do you guys do that? Do you guys make mistakes? How many people make mistakes? Show of hands. All right. And then you learn from your mistakes and then you don't do it again, right? So the fact that you make mistakes isn't that big of a deal. And when we're talking about the aggregate economy, what Hayek's betting on is that the people who are doing what's best for themselves, their good moves will far outweigh the bad moves and won't cause the economy to go all in one direction. Another thing that was in this book that he kind of put spot on is that some of the things that the Federal Reserve does causes everybody to potentially make the same mistake at one time. So, when the Federal Reserve wants to stimulate the economy, do they increase the money supply or decrease it? Increase it, lowers interest rates. That's a government-managed thing going on, right? So they are really influencing the interest rates. So when interest rates are low, do you borrow money or do you save money? You borrow. Now you see how if borrowing happens to be a bad thing to do, and we don't have some people borrowing and some people not borrowing, if we all are borrowing, we're all kind of directed through that top-down approach. We're all directed by the government to do borrowing because they think that's the best thing to do. In some circumstances, maybe that is the best thing to do, but over the whole decade of the 2000s, we were all doing that same thing, all funneled that direction by the maestros at the top in the Federal Reserve. And therefore, when things go bad, we don't have some people's mistakes offsetting other people's good decisions. We have us all making a big mistake. And then that's when GDP goes up and up and up, and then horribly down, where we don't have mistakes and benefits offsetting each other. So that's what Hayek would claim is a better approach, is to put solid laws and rules and property rights in place. The rules of the game have to be well defined. He's certainly not anywhere close to anarchy. We just need to minimize everything, let people be free to do whatever they want. So issues like pollution, things that we care about, those can be part of the laws, but we got to be careful as we start to impose more and more regulation. What are the incentives of the regulators? What is the bureaucrat trying to do? It's awful nice job security if you're in the business of making rules and enforcing rules to make more rules, right? If you currently have 100 laws or 100 rules on the book, and you're worried about your job, create 100 more for people to follow through. That's probably some good job security. And so public choice theory in economics analyzes those incentives that may lead us down paths that are unhealthy overall when a bureaucrat's self-interest gets in the way of what the best interest is for the United States. Okay, so let me pause there for a sec. Questions or comments? So we've got these animal spirits, and let's just put for this point that we need big government. Yes?
So no point up on the even ground with those things in
Well, I'd say there is even ground. Part of the ground that I think is there is recognizing kind of where we're at currently and making moves that would seem to move this direction unless there's something that came up that needed the attention of others. So again, Hayek, Friedman, even way back to Adam Smith, we're not out to eliminate government completely. So public goods, national defense, there's some issues with those types of goods that, yeah, we still need the government collecting money to ward off crazies like the marathon bomber the other day, as well as other things going on around the world. So there's still a need for a public good. But it's more about the direction of where we're going. It's clear from the data of where the government's gone in the last 70 years. From the Great Depression, the amount of government spending is a big hockey stick. If we're to measure it, it kind of goes like this. So it's continuing to go up. And there's some reasons that I don't have time to get into, but it's kind of like what I just said about bureaucrats having incentives to make more rules. The way the system's set up right now, it's kind of set up to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the direction. So then it's kind of like the issue of changing direction if you, it doesn't all have to happen at one time. Rachel?
I kind of noticed in the video that, I don't know if they were alluding to something here, but Keynes was kind of losing with this fight, but then they cheered him on anyways and pronounced him the winner, and then all the reporters came up to him at the end, so I don't know if you could.
Yeah, and I think they were alluding to the media, and I think the general perception would be to do a little bit, at this point anyway. In fact, quite frankly, putting Obama in office probably is at least one indication that the general public would say Keynes is the winner, right? If we had to pick off that model, but I think they were alluding a little bit to the media plays an important role on what message gets out to people. Definitely. Okay. Anything else?
Last thing.
Yep.
So on the idea of using that hockey stick of government spending, ideas on charter tax and those who might be well to do, may lower the hockey stick direction.
The hockey stick here is the amount of G, not the T. So when we bring the tax into it, it's how we fund it. So this is really on the number of programs going up. So it would be more on bringing the G down. So imagine if, and that's the question, we'll work through the rest of this chapter though, but when you've got a deficit coming from T minus G, so this is really government savings the way I have it wrote, ends up being a negative number. How do we correct it, right? And that's currently what the battle is going on. In general, Republican Congress says this has got to come down. Okay, we'll keep this fixed. Over here, we'll take a little bit of that down, but we need to move this up, and so that's where all of the discussion comes from. What was in the video that I think is an important item. There's good evidence that we've even seen in some of the models we've done, and I think I may have said this in general. You can't spend your way out of a recession. You can't just spend money. And I heard somebody say, last year or something, I can't remember who to give credit to, but it's like trying to change the level of the swimming pool. If the swimming pool is the economy, and how I'm going to do it is I'm going to scoop out one pail of water, a big 5-gallon pail of water. I'm going to walk around to the other end of the pool, and I'm going to pour it in. The level of the pool doesn't change, right? So if what you're taking away from one person and putting it into another, that's not economic growth. What we learned from way back from chapter 2 is that economic growth comes from productivity and actually making more stuff. So value creation of putting people to work because they're filling a void. And that's what Hayek would argue would be the important thing to do. Okay, so Keynesian has won. The classical theory, or let's call it neoclassical, so neoclassical theory is that markets clear fairly quickly. So Under this line of thinking would fall the rational expectations thought, or that was one model that we showed how people might be able to adjust their behavior fairly quickly, which again, if they're doing that and we're not stuck in the long run, we're not all dead in the long run, which is the Keynes thought, then that puts less credibility into the swimming pool maneuver if there's not even much short run benefits as well.
That's supposed to be
Markets adjust fairly quickly, yes. Okay, under the neoclassical thought also would fall monetarism. And kind of the king of monetarism was Milton Friedman. And monetarism is kind of weird because you'd think that a monetarist would be an advocate of monetary policy to be changing and adjusting, but it's actually the opposite. What Milton Friedman, when we studied the quantity theory of money, in the money chapter, that was Milton's work. He said in the long run, money's going to be inflationary. Then that was prior to guys like Lucas coming along with rational expectations, kind of shortening the long run. And then that would only work better into Milton. So Milton would be a believer in rational expectations too. Even prior to that, he thought markets clear fairly quickly. And so with monetarism, kind of the new thing to add here is that they would advocate a fixed fixed change in money supply. And we did some examples in class. So set the change in the money supply equal to 3%, for instance, for example. Why is that? Well, Milton said that way your expectation of inflation should be 3% in the long run. And what you've done from Hayek's eyes is you've eliminated one source of uncertainty. We're no longer going to allow the Fed to increase the money supply and decrease the money supply and monkey around with the money market. We're just going to have it fixed. And therefore, the key outcome with this is that agents in the economy, both businesses and households, now can form a more solid expectation. We've reduced uncertainty. So the key point with that is that we've reduced uncertainty in the economy in regard to inflation. Our microeconomic models would say then that businesses can make smarter loans. We don't have this guy trying to not only think about the business that the real estate developer that came for the loan, now we've eliminated him having to think, well, what is Ben Bernanke going to do next month? How is that going to affect my decision? And so the more uncertainty that we create on top of the loan that he's doing to the real estate developer, if we start adding uncertainty with what the Fed's going to do, they have to adjust their behavior accordingly. And now they're a Fed predictor as well as a business predictor. So we're adding on layers of uncertainty into the economy. So reduced uncertainty in the economy in regard to inflation for decisions by households and businesses. The last one that I want to put up, I know we don't have much more than a minute, so I'll just get this one up, and let's see, that was mine. Wasn't I numbering these? 1, 2? Okay. Well, let's go then with a bullet. Real business cycle. Theory, RBC. And kind of the interesting insight that these guys brought to the table is that maybe the long-run aggregate supply isn't as stable as we thought. That technology is impinging on us all the time. So long-run aggregate supply shifters, we have productivity shocks. And so their world would look something more like this. New invention hits the market, this shifts. People got to figure out what to do with it, or some substitution of other things. Maybe productivity falls, how we learn computers, and so then it's here. And so they're saying, well, maybe this long run isn't quite as long as it was if we start thinking about productivity changes. And so we allow this to flux around a little bit. All right, we'll wrap up there.